Good morning. Good morning to everyone in the North America time zone, at least, and good evening to our friends in Japan and other parts of Asia. Welcome to the Asia Society Policy Institute's program on U.S.-Japan relations. I'm Danny Russell, and I'm joined by my friend and fellow vice president here at ASPI, the distinguished Wendy Cutler, who has a wealth of experience dealing with Japan through her government service as a trade negotiator. So, 10 days or so ago, Japanese Prime Minister Suga visited Washington and became the first leader to hold an in-person summit with President Biden. I think the significance of being first is well understood as a testament to the importance of Japan to U.S. interests. Maybe less well understood is the unbelievable complexity of engineering a leader's visit, let alone at the start of a new administration, let alone in the middle of a pandemic, let alone having it all go so smoothly. Well, today, Wendy and I have the pleasure of chatting with two really remarkable people, both of whom know a lot about U.S.-Japan relations, know a lot about leaders' visits. First, let me introduce my old friend, Ambassador Koji Tomita, who just took up his post in Washington barely 3 months ago, just days after President Biden was inaugurated. He most recently served as ambassador to the Republic of Korea in an extremely challenging period in Japan-Korea bilateral relations. Before that, he served as ambassador to Israel, and in between, he masterminded the very successful G20 summit hosted by Japan in 2018. We worked closely together when I served in the Obama administration, and Koji was first the deputy and later the director general for North America at the Foreign Ministry, and in between when he served as the DCM at the embassy in Washington. So welcome to the program, Ambassador, and welcome back to Washington. We are also lucky enough to be joined by our very good friend and a really marvelous former ambassador to Japan, Caroline Kennedy, who served in Tokyo from 2013 to 2017 and who played the absolutely crucial role in engineering historic progress in the U.S.-Japan relationship, progress that led to landmark acts of reconciliation, like the joint visits by the two leaders to Hiroshima and then later to Pearl Harbor. And Caroline, quite apart from handling Obama's visits to Japan and Abe's visits to the U.S., I remember accompanying then Vice President Joe Biden when he visited Japan in late December of 2013, when you had been ambassador for all of 2 weeks or something crazy like that. What a trip. So Wendy and I could not have two better people to help us make sense of the Suga-Biden summit, or to help us think through sort of what comes next in this quote unquote new era for U.S.-Japan relations. So we've got a little under an hour. And we're going to begin with Ambassador Tomita, then turn to Ambassador Kennedy. The four of us can chat for a while, and we'll open it up to questions from the live audience. So all of you out there in Zoom land, please use the Q&A function in Zoom to pose your questions. If after 1 year you still don't know how to do that, I can't help you. And Wendy and I will try to get to as many of those questions as we can. So without further ado, Ambassador Tomita, yours was the key role in preparations for Prime Minister Suga's visit. You were in all the meetings. We're all ears. So over to you, please.
Well, thank you very much, Danny, and my greetings to all the viewers watching this program out there. It's really great to be here. And let me start by thanking the Asia Society for giving the opportunity to share my thoughts on Prime Minister Suga's visit to Washington. I have had the pleasure of working with the Society in various capacities over the years, and most recently as Japanese ambassador in Korea. I'm really looking forward to reaching out, not just to the American audience, but also to the broader audience world over. And, I thank the Society for helping me do that. And it's also a great personal pleasure to reconnect with Danny Russel. As Danny explained, I have worked with Danny for many years. And, I've been always impressed with his absolute dedication to the Japan-US partnership. And I have every confidence that the Asia Society will have an even stronger role in enhancing this partnership under his leadership. And I'm also delighted that this event is graced with two more, great friends of Japan, Caroline Kedemi and Wendy Cutler. And I'm looking forward to talking to both of you later. And just talking about Friends of Japan, I think I belong to the last active generation in the Japanese Foreign Service who actually knew the time when Walter Mondale was ambassador in Tokyo. I was deputy director for the US desk at that time, and I had the privilege of meeting him many occasions. And he was a great human being before being a great ambassador, and I dearly miss him. And as a new ambassador, coming at the time when the U.S. is going through a political transition, my biggest priority has been to establish a solid ground on which we can work with the new administration. And on this score, I think I have been incredibly fortunate in being able to witness very robust exchanges between the Japanese government and the new administration in a very short space of time since the start of Biden administration, including the Blinken-Austin visit to Japan last month and the recent visit by Prime Minister to Washington. So we got off to a very good start, and I feel very, very upbeat about the prospect for our partnership in the coming years. With regard to Prime Minister's visit, I do encourage you to study the documents adopted on that occasion, the joint statement and two documents annexed to the statement. They pretty much speak for themselves, and you can get a good sense of the direction of our bilateral partnership in the coming years. That said, I think it might be useful to share my own personal thoughts on this occasion. Based on my personal observation, sitting through, as Danny said, all the sessions except for the one-on-one lunch between the two leaders. But before I talk about the substance of the meeting, let me say a few words on the preparation, because preparation was the important part of my responsibilities as ambassador. And throughout my career in the Foreign Service, I've been involved as many leaders meetings as I care to remember, including the ones between our two countries. But this one was very, very unique. Because there have been no precedents, therefore no protocols for organizing the meeting amidst the pandemic. So accordingly, at every stage of our preparation, we had to strike a fine balance between the requirements for a productive meeting and full precaution against the COVID-19. And, I must admit the final arrangements are not ideal. the image of two men sitting across the long table with their facial masks on in front of the plate of hamburgers is not the kind of the image you expect of the leaders meeting at the White House. But in the end, I think these arrangements achieved their purpose, and in providing a very productive environment, a practical environment for the meeting. And I'm very, very grateful to the U.S. colleagues in making their best efforts in very challenging circumstances. Indeed, the hamburger event I alluded to turned out to be a very useful ice-breaking session where the two leaders developed real personal rapport, not by talking about business, but talking about their life, family, and their basic political outlook. And this rapport was reinforced by their discussion in the following sessions, developing into what I believe to be a very strong personal affinity. I have done the post-meeting analysis both with Tokyo and with the US side, but there's a unanimous view that that two leaders came out of the meeting with real mutual respect and affection. Why is this the case? My own personal sense is that the rapport is partly based on the commonality in the factors which shaped these two political leaders, shaped their political career and their political beliefs. These are two very plain speaking self-made politicians who had built up their positions with the strength of their political convictions in the face of difficult personal challenges. So I think that very much created the personal bond between those two human beings. So anyway, whatever the reasons, I think it is worth pointing out that this summit was the first of many meetings the two leaders will have in the coming years. So I would say the personal bond they developed this time is the most important deliverables of their first in-person meeting. So it will certainly serve as a very important foundation on which they can develop real collaboration in the coming years. Now, in terms of substance, as is reflected in the very robust reference to China in the joint statement, I was really impressed by the amount of attention the two leaders brought to this strategic challenge in their discussions. Therefore, the joint statement is the clearest ever expression of a concern and intent vis-a-vis China issued by the leaders of our countries. Judging from the very quick pushback from the Chinese government, I think the Chinese friends heard the message loud and clear. That said, I should also point out that sending a public message is only a part of the very complex set of objectives we need to pursue vis-a-vis China. China is not a one-dimensional military power, a superpower the Soviet Union once was during the Cold War. It is a potent military power, but it is also the second largest economy in the world with a population of 1.4 billion. It has the capacity as well as responsibility to contribute to global efforts to address wide-ranging challenges, including the climate change. Well, Secretary Tony Blinken explained the complexity of a challenge by breaking down our engagement with China into three categories: adversarial, competitive, and collaborative. And just as Prime Minister Suga was meeting President Biden, John Kerry was visiting Shanghai, soliciting cooperation from China on the issue of the climate change. And yet another high-power delegation was visiting Taipei at the same time as the Prime Minister was meeting President Biden. I think these movements are pretty much indicative of the complexity I'm talking about. So in the meeting, the two leaders addressed all these three aspects of engagement with China. Tony Blinken described there was a recognition both of us need stability in our relation with China, and a joint statement underscored the need to work with China on areas of common interest. Above all, there was a crucial recognition in the meeting that if we are to prevail in the strategic competition with China, we have to do it from the position of strength. And this task would involve, among other things, by upgrading our deterrent and responsible capabilities of our alliance in view of the increasingly challenging evolution of strategic balance in the region, and by actively engaging our allies and partners and like-minded countries, including through the framework of the Quad, and by raising our competitiveness and resilience of our economy, leading in technological innovation, working on the sensitive supply chains and so on and so forth, as reflected in the list of projects delineated in the document next to the joint statement. And of course, apart from China, the two leaders addressed a number of regional and global issues, but I'm afraid I'm pretty much running out of my time. So I would be happy to come back on these issues in the Q&A session later. But before I conclude, let me just underscore that the practical deliverables, the annex to the joint statement show how closely aligned our policy objectives are, from climate change to the supply chains. So these are not the usual, obligatory leaders meeting wish list, which would be quickly forgotten after the meeting. These have already been serious interagency discussions on the Japanese side, and we very much look forward to closely working with the United States, US side for their early and steady implementation. So all in all, I take a great satisfaction and encouragement from what the two leaders accomplished last week, and I really look forward to working on the follow-ups. So those are my general comments, PM's trip, and well, I'd be happy to respond to any specific queries. So back to you, Danny.
Thanks very much, Ambassador. And I'm struck by a number of the points you touched on, including the personal relationship. I was asked by a reporter before the visit how I thought two newcomers as leaders were going to do. And I had to laugh because, as you alluded to, Biden and Suga are the two most experienced newcomers in politics, both of whom have been number twos for 8 years themselves. In any event, let me turn the floor over to my colleague, Wendy.
Well, thanks, Danny, and thanks to Ambassador Tomita, and thanks so much for joining us at the Asia Society so early in your tenure. And we hope this is just one of your many engagements that we can share with you over the coming years. We also want to thank you for your touching words on Ambassador Mondale. I think all of us, work closely with him at different points in our careers. And, he contributed so much to the U.S.-Japan relationship and strengthening it, and his passing away is a real loss for us. And also, thank you for sharing your insights into the meeting, including your personal observations. I found them quite interesting, particularly your mentioning of this one-on-one lunch they had with hamburgers, and also your observations on some of the substance that was touched upon. And we're going to get, I promise you, we'll get more into that over the next 40 minutes or so. If I can then turn to Caroline Kennedy, former ambassador to Japan from the United States. You've had so much experience also with Leaders Summit meetings, and I didn't even know until Danny mentioned about your early meetings with Vice President Biden, Danny, coming to Tokyo so early in your tenure. So let me ask you, you've heard kind of Ambassador Tomita's take on this summit meeting. What's your take? What would you add? How important are these kind of one-on-one sessions to establishing bonds? And frankly, you're probably one of the few people in the world who know Suga and Biden, both gentlemen, so well and for so long. How would you assess their personal relationship? And in particular, do you think that the President Biden is leaving this meeting thinking that Suga is someone he can rely on and work on? Over to you, Caroline.
Thank you, Ambassador Tomita, and Danny and Wendy. It's always good to see you. I was so pleased to see this visit by Prime Minister Suga take place as the first foreign official visit of President Biden's new administration. I did have a chance to get to know Prime Minister Suga during my time in Japan when he was Chief Cabinet Secretary, and saw him work so powerfully on the U.S.-Japan alliance in particular. People have said that he doesn't have as much, perhaps, international experience as his predecessor, but that's not anything that I would, that's not an opinion that I would join. There's nobody who knows more about the U.S.-Japan alliance and its implementation in Japan, as well as its strategic implications. And so I think that we're going to see a continuation of what began in the Abe administration, where Japan is more and more important and playing a increasingly visible and powerful role in the region and in the alliance itself. And so I think that he is exactly the person that the United States needs, and I think that President Biden is exactly the leader that Japan needs. And I'm so pleased that they were able to forge a personal connection. As Ambassador Tomita said, I thought that might happen, and from knowing them both a bit, and I'm so glad that it did. I had a chance to see Prime Minister Suga before that meeting, and he was very eager to meet and get to know Vice President Harris. And I have heard that he also very much enjoyed his time with her. So I think that for him to have a real personal connection and to be able to honestly share with the United States leadership how he sees China, how things have changed and are evolving over time, how Japan will approach that very complex relationship is incredibly valuable for the United States, because it does look different from here than it looks from Tokyo. So I think the visit was immensely beneficial for both countries, and I think that the leaders connected so well is really a huge advantage, both for them and really for all the people for both of our countries.
Well, thanks. Maybe now I can move over to Ambassador Tomita and ask you a question. And I don't think you're going to be surprised. The topic is going to be trade. Mm-hmm. And here's my question to you. I mean, through the years, issues of trade friction have really dominated a lot of these summit meetings. But in terms of this meeting, trade, it seems, was barely mentioned. And when it was in the joint statement, it was all about strengthening ties, working together to reform the WTO, to tackle the challenges of climate and trade. But a question for you, did TPP even come up at this summit? And just more generally, what are Japan's views about the US someday rejoining TPP? Would you welcome us back? And even if that meant that we would need to seek some changes and updates to the agreement, would we still be welcome back? Over to you.
Well, thank you very much for that question. And for the first part of the question, the TPP was not discussed during the leaders' meeting. And with regard to our, expectations for the new administration, of course, given the strategic objective of this agreement, and also given the experience of having worked with the U.S. administration so hard for this arrangement, we dearly like to see the United States coming back to this framework. But at the same time, I don't think the political realities now prevailing in Washington, D.C. will easily allow the U.S. to make a decision to come back. I don't think this reality will not change very soon. But in the meantime, I think we still need the constructive U.S. engagement in the multilateral trading dialogue. And, as Danny alluded in his introduction, I was chairing a G20 process 2 years ago, and I sorely missed the U.S. active involvement in the trade discussions on that occasion. So I think we can encourage U.S. to do that in several different ways. We can encourage the U.S. to play a more active role in discussions in the multilateral fora, including the WTO. WTO is being faced with a very important challenge of its reform. So I think I see, important U.S. role in that process. Also, instead of the comprehensive arrangement like a TPP, there are specific areas, sectors which need some sort of multilateral discipline, like a digital trade. So if not a comprehensive arrangement like TPP, maybe we may have an opportunity to work with the U.S. Administration to make a headway in our efforts to establish some sort of discipline in those emerging areas. So yes, we want the U.S. back in TPP, but in short of that, I think we have many agenda we can work with the new administration.
Hey, thank you both. There's a lot to follow up on in what each of you have said. I think I'm going to start with Caroline, if I might, because as I alluded to, you really are the sort of the mastermind of the powerful image and the sort of transformational visits, and that really did so much to shape positive attitudes towards the other in both the United States and in Japan. So put your thinking cap on. At some point, President Biden is going to make a return trip to Japan to reciprocate for Prime Minister Suga's visit here. And let's take the Olympics for a moment out of the equation and fast forward to a healthy post-COVID world. So just off the top of your head, what are some of the sorts of things that you might suggest to your good friend Joe Biden that he do in Japan, ways that he can connect with the people there, ways that he can bolster America's image. I've got to say that the first time I went with him to Japan in 2011, he flew up to Sendai and visited some of the survivors, displaced survivors from the 3/11 earthquake and tsunami. But anyway, you know him even better than I do. He's a very empathetic person. So what if you were in the planning meetings, what are some of the ideas you might throw out?
Well, I think, like you said, like you referred to, President Biden really connects with people, and especially those who are going through difficult times. I think that's one of the reasons that he's our president right now. So I know that depending on the circumstances at the time of his visit, he will come up with sort of the best way to do that. I was really impressed on the visit that you planned in 2013 that I got to participate in. But there was a real emphasis on women. He went out of his way to meet with women entrepreneurs. And I certainly that's been a big focus during his career here. And I would think that he would carry forward that kind of message to Japan to include maybe communities that are less central or sometimes marginalized there, just as he has always gone out of his way to do here. If there's a way to bring people together from parts of society that are not always front and center, I would imagine that President Biden would do that, as well as making sure to showcase the increasingly important partnership in cyber and advanced technologies and 5G and all of the cutting edge things that make the U.S.-Japan partnership so exciting.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's a really important point about promoting women and girls in education, in employment, in leadership, in all sectors of society. And boy, is that a space in politics? Yeah, is that a space where Japan has some headroom for growth? That's a great point. Wendy, let me squeeze one more question in before I hand the microphone back to you and turn back to Ambassador Tomita. So I was very interested in your comments about the discussion pertaining to China. Obviously, it's a hugely important issue. It's very much on people's minds. I did, in fact, read the joint statement and saw the clear expression of concern. You made the point that Japan is like-minded in terms of, Tony Blinken's 3 C's, cooperate, compete, and confront, or the adversarial part of it, but that there needs to be stability in the relationship and that we need to work with China on common interests. That's a theme that we're hearing a little bit less of in the United States. So there were 2 newspaper items that came out right after the visit that I thought were quite interesting, and I wanted to probe you a little bit on. One was an editorial in the Asahi Shimbun that basically says, don't blindly follow those Americans off the cliff. They're too adversarial towards China, and we don't want to be dragged into an anti-China sort of confrontation. The other one was about Taiwan. There was a Nikkei story reporting that the U.S. side had pushed Japan for stronger commitment to help Taiwan, a kind of Taiwan Relations Act sort of thing that clearly would have real consequences to Japan's relationship with the PRC. What I'm trying to get at, Ambassador, is sort of a better feel for not what the US and Japan agree on with respect to China and the challenge, but even if there are nuances, help us understand what are some of the differences in Japan's view of China, Japan's approach to China. After all, we have a lot in common, but we're not identical in terms of our positions or our interests. So can you help us understand that a little bit?
Well, Japan and the United States are different geopolitical positions, and that create some differences in terms of approach to the question as to how we are going to respond to the strategic challenge posed by China. For instance, there might be a difference in terms of a comfort level and what sort of public messaging we should be doing. I mean, on Taiwan, how we are going to phrase our thinking in the joint statement, for instance. There's been differences. There have been differences. So, we had a very intense discussion beforehand to come up with the statement. But the important thing is, bringing together, our respective point of views, our approaches, our ideas together, and work out something, working at a common strategy. I think that would make our, response to China even more effective. The strategic challenge we are talking about is not going to be fought on independently. I mean, by Japan or the United States. It has to involve the bilateral efforts or even the broader efforts, engaging the other partners as our allies, as a like-minded country. I talked about Quad, for instance. So I think, of course, there are differences, but I think we need to focus on what we have in common, what we can bring together from a respective positions. I think that would be the things we need to focus on.
Okay, so let me then move on. In terms of, let's talk about the next steps, Ambassador Tomita, with respect to all the work that was laid out in this joint statement. And in particular, I would note that there's really detailed work laid out in the technology area, as well as on climate, as well as on healthcare. And so just two questions here. One would be on the technology side. I noted that together we're setting aside $4.5 billion for 5G and other technology cooperation. And I think there are a lot of questions. What is this money going to be used for? And what are the next steps with respect to that initiative? And second, I would just like to to relay a question from the audience, and that has to do with healthcare and COVID, and in particular, with respect to the recent Quad leaders' agreement to provide billions of vaccines throughout Asia. And the question is given what's going on in India, in COVID, which we're all witnessing with great sadness and trying to do what we can to help, is that a setback for the Quad initiative with respect to providing billions of vaccines to the region?
Well, the first question, technological side, as you said, there are very detailed list of the what we are about to address in the coming years. But in terms of specific structure of how our cooperation will evolve, I think it's still early days. I think, for instance, on the question of supply chains, there's been ongoing discussion as to what sort of structure would be needed to advance this goal on the U.S. side, for instance. So I think it takes some time before we get together to agree on the specific strategies to implement those objectives. With regard to the amount of money earmarked for instance, on the 5G, I think those are the resources already put aside by the respective government. I mean, on Japanese side, I think the total amount of money we are going to spend through various schemes in Japan amounts to 2 billion the US dollar, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Those are already earmarked for specific purposes on the Japanese side. So the challenge is to find the synergy between the programs we have already in place. So how to find this synergy? I think this will take some time before we agree to a specific strategies. And as far as the COVID, the vaccine scheme on the India is concerned, I think we have an agreement in principle when the leaders met through the video link earlier this year. The basic idea is to Japan and the United States help finance the expansion of the vaccine production capability in India. And the three countries, Japan, US, Australia, will help the distribution of the vaccine produced in India in a broader Asian regions. I think that was the basic idea we agreed. And after the meeting, we have set up the working group to implement this idea into specific program. And of course, we have a very serious situation in India, which has had impact on the vaccine. But the code process, I think we are. It's a more sort of long-term approach, financing and expanding capability in India and so on and so forth. So I think we are talking about months and probably a year to implement this project. So I think we can to manage the process despite the prevailing situation, COVID situation in India. So we will be making a lot of efforts toward that end in the coming weeks and months.
Well, thank you for that. And I think the vaccine announcement coming out of the Quad leaders meeting really showed that the Quad countries could work together on an affirmative agenda going forward on really key critical issues. So it's so important that initiative continue to play out and to be implemented. Carolyn, if I could turn to you, and you might be a little surprised, I'm going to ask you a Korea question. Now, some would have thought I would start with Ambassador Tomita, given that he was recently Japan's ambassador to Korea. But I wanted just to highlight in the joint statement, there was a sentence that said the following, that both leaders confirmed that trilateral cooperation with Korea is essential to our security and prosperity. I was wondering if you could share with us, why is it so important that there be trilateral cooperation? And from the U.S. point of view, why are we, paying so much attention to this issue? I know that when you were ambassador, you were involved in a lot of these trilateral discussions, both with the U.S. ambassadors, but also, with the officials from Korea and Japan. So can you just shed some light and kind of give your perspective on why these relationships are so important, particularly at this point in time?
Well, as you know, from the economic side, and Danny and Ambassador Tomita have worked on for so many years, Japan and Korea are our two most important allies in Asia, if not in the world, and democracies that share our values. And when we are working together, I think that we have provided stability, prosperity for the region, and also a counterweight to China's attempts to change the status quo. So as North Korea becomes complex again, as the dynamics in the region change, it's even more important. And we have had great success cooperating in intelligence and other ways over the years. Japan and Korea have a 50-year relationship and have made great progress in putting some of their historical issues into a better place after the 2015 Comfort Women Agreement, and things are more difficult now. But these are long-term relationships that everyone has to, each generation, each administration has to continue working on to do everything we can to make them stronger. And it's great that both President Biden and in particular Secretary Blinken have spent a lot of time on these issues on the U.S. side. As Deputy Secretary, he convened regular trilateral meetings with his counterparts. And I think people felt that there was a lot of cooperation and a lot of benefit in those across many areas, not just in the difficult issues, but in terms of cooperation in space or scientific research, medical area. So I think that there's very strong relationships to build on, and with the kind of personal relationship that President Biden and Prime Minister Suga have established, and the importance of this issue to all three countries, I am sure that things will get the attention that they need to progress, and the U.S. will do what it can to be helpful. But of course, Japan and Korea have, they take the lead here.
Well, I'd like to follow up on Korea, if I could turn back to Ambassador Tomita. We talked about the China challenge. You've spoken about trilateral coordination, and there's a question in the chat from Kyoto about what are some of the specific areas for trilateral cooperation to deal with Chinese sort of coercion. The two foreign ministers, Foreign Minister Motegi and Foreign Minister Chung, are expected to visit Washington for a trilateral soon. President Moon is coming to Washington next month. So there are a lot of moving parts here, but for trilateral cooperation to really function, at least beyond the pro forma level, there has to be a bilateral relationship between Japan and Korea that is constructive and that enables the two governments to do more than sort of a grudging synchronization when the United States puts forward an initiative. So your experience is very fresh. What are the prospects for getting the Japan-Korea relationship onto a constructive track in a way that really allows more active cooperation in both directions?
Well, thank you very much for that question. And indeed, I was ambassador in Korea and I was working on a number of very challenging issues while I was there. But as far as our bilateral relations with Korea is concerned, I'm an optimist, which is a rare breed in the Japanese Foreign Service. I'm an optimist for longer term prospect because between Japan and ROK, there have been many ups and downs for over more than half century. But look what happened during these 50 years. I mean, there was tremendous development in the exchanges between our two countries. I mean, for instance, in 1965, there was only 10,000 people traveling back and forth between Japan and Korea. But a few years ago, there was 10,000 travelers traveling between two countries per day. So you can imagine the tremendous progress we made in terms of exchanges over these 50 years. So I have no doubt that for a longer time, I think we will see equal development in exchanges between our two countries. So for a longer term, I'm an optimist. And, we have to be optimistic about managing our bilateral relations. That's my, credo when I was ambassador there. But at the same time, the short term, I think the prospect is very challenging. Not just because of the traditional sort of emotional animosity relating to our unfortunate past, but because of the very the constraint posed by the litigation, which have been brought to the Korean court in recent years. And these litigations have considerably narrowed down the room for the two governments to work out the political compromise. So it's very difficult to manage these litigation. And we are very much looking forward to the Korean government will take a step to alleviate these negative constraints posed by the litigation. I mean, because all these lawsuits are taking place in the within the jurisdiction of Korea. So there's very little Japan can do dealing with these constraints. So, but just like to underscore that despite the difficulties in bilateral relations, Japan remains fully committed to the promoting trilateral discussion, dialogue, solidarity over the issues of regional securities. As the U.S. government is concluding the policy review on North Korea, I think there will be a very robust coordination will take place among the Japan-U.S. ROK. So, we remain committed to trilateral, and we're making our best effort to sort out our differences in our bilateral relations.
Thank you, Ambassador. There's a great line about optimism by George Bernard Shaw. He said, "The optimist is the guy who invents the airplane. The pessimist is the guy who invented the parachute." So maybe we need both in the Japan-Korea relationship. But I hope so. Wendy, can I ask one more question? Caroline, I want to ask you, you have seen, as we all have in the polling, like Pew polls and others, a really significant drop over the last 4 years, coincidentally, in Japanese attitudes and confidence in the U.S. And in the press conference with President Biden, Prime Minister Suga made a very direct reference to his concerns about anti-Asian discrimination and violence in the United States. And there's also a related question in the chat from someone, a Japanese American, who's asking kind of what can we do to help? What can individuals do for the relationship? And I wonder, given your experience in helping Japanese friends to understand America and feel good about it, to feel reassured about American society, how do you talk to them about what's happening in the U.S. and also what do you say to Americans about how they can help, bolster Japanese confidence in the U.S. and just generally strengthen the U.S.-Japan relationship?
Well, there's a lot in that, and obviously this is a moment of reckoning in American society, and I think the world does understand, but it is very different from Japan, that one of the ways that we make progress here in the United States is to publicly air our differences, to try to work through them, to be honest about them, our shortcomings, and try to hold ourselves true to our founding ideals. And I think right now we're all seeing that we have a lot of improvements that we need to make. And certainly the last year has humbled all of us. So I do believe from our past history that we will come together and be a better country as a result of this. And I think that in some ways that can be an inspiring process, although a painful one. And so I would say to people in Japan that they should trust us and pray for us, and to people anywhere that it's, it all does start with us, and to look at what you can do in your own society. I think certainly people deal with differences and prejudices in different ways, and so, but no society doesn't have them. So I think we all need to be understanding of our own shortcomings as well as those of others, and try to work together to improve. The world is becoming smaller. I do work with students from different countries, Japan, Korea, the Philippines, and the U.S. regularly, and I do see amongst a younger generation a real desire for collaboration and understanding that gives me great hope. And they are developing the skills that they need to overcome these kinds of differences. So I definitely think it can be done, and I think that it's up to the older generation to help them in that effort. And I'm not surprised that people in Japan are shocked. And I was very impressed that the Prime Minister did mention directly his concerns about the violence in this country, and the anti-Asian racism specifically, because I think a lot of Americans share those concerns. So I think that good friends are able to talk honestly, and I appreciate that he did that.
Wow, I'm so glad I asked you that question. That really is an inspirational answer, and I thank you for that. So between your very moving and inspirational injunction to us all and Ambassador Tomita's chronic optimism, I think you've given us a lot of lift. We're coming pretty close to the end of our time, but Wendy, let me come back to you for any thoughts or final words? If you want to sneak in a super quick question, you can do that too.
I don't think we have time for a question, but I do just want to say it's always good to end these events on a note of optimism. And so, like Danny, I'm glad to hear that even though we're facing some huge challenges, that both speakers were able to convey optimism. We really thank both Ambassador Tomita, former Ambassador Kennedy, for sharing your insights into the summit, your thoughts on next steps and the challenges we face. I think we'd all agree we kind of just scratched the surface on so many issues, so we're going to have you back. So we will be in touch, but thanks to all our viewers for joining us. And Danny and I really enjoyed the pleasure of your company this morning and your really useful and thoughtful insights and observations. Thank you. Have a good day or good evening, everyone, depending on where you're viewing from. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.